Hi Booktube, and welcome to a new video. This is a recent reads for 4 books read, 3 novels and 1 non-fiction. The first is Perceval, Everett, Telephone, published in 2020. No One Will See Me Cry by Cristina, Rivera, Garza, originally Mexican, now resident in San Diego, and this was translated by Andrew Hurley. Tarjei, Vesaas, Norwegian, The Hills Reply, translated by Elizabeth Roccan. And the non-fiction is Jarman, Chroma. So I'll start with the fiction. Perceval Everett's Telephone, as I say, published in 2020, and I bought this before I bought 2 other of his books last year. I'd read several previously. And the 2 I read last year, one was Perceval Everett by Virgil Russell, which, as the title suggests, is quite postmodern. And then there was the wonderful The Trees, which is a hysterical satire with a very dark message. Very different in style. And this is, again, the reason I read those 2 before this is because when I picked this up, I saw on Goodreads that there was some pretty dissenting voices that this wasn't very good. Not at all. And again, as I say, it suggests the versatility of Everett as a writer. So we've had one satirical piece, one pomo piece, and this is just incredibly emotional roller coaster, really. I will say that I, having read it, and I give it 5 stars, but having read it, I can see why some people didn't get on with it because of the 2 different tones within the book, but I'll come on to that. So the main character is a professor with tenure in a university in Los Angeles. He is a geologist and paleontologist. He works with fossils and bones. His interest is in birds, extinct and extant, but based on the fossil evidence. He's not very nice, which he himself admits. He's just a bit disconnected from things around him. He's not very sympathetic to colleagues, to students. The spark has gone out of his marriage. The only thing he is absolutely wedded and committed to is his preteen daughter. So it sort of starts off quite sort of slowly and subversively. You think it's a bit of a sort of a campus novel where he avoids the possible Me Too of a female student coming on to him. He also has a colleague who is struggling to secure tenure but hasn't published anything, and he's sort of slightly offhandedly dealing with her. But he becomes more and more sort of sucked into her story. But the crushing blow comes with his daughter having a medical diagnosis of a degenerative disease called Batten's syndrome, which basically its main thrust is a sort of childhood dementia. So it's not like Alzheimer's at the end of one's life. This is, and there's no cure for it, and it's a real body blow. And it is so tenderly drawn. It's quite subtly done in that we don't get too much focus on the symptoms of the daughter as she sort of progressively degenerates. It's from his point of view, and it's about fatherhood. And it's, as I say, it's so moving. He also dealt with the subject of Alzheimer's in one of his earlier books called Erasure, but that was of a sort of an Alzheimer's of a mother character in there. So I wonder if there's something that, this is the key core subject to Everett, that he's written about it at least twice now. But anyway, it was so beautifully done, as I say, and so moving and so tender. And they ask her what she, they never tell her the prognosis, because they think it's, that she deserves to have the quality of life that she can still have. Why put a cloud on that? So they ask her what she most wants to do, and she says go to Paris. And they go on this family holiday to Paris, which is just brilliantly rendered. The sort of the mixture of the joy of her seeing these things, particularly museums and artworks, but also the moments when she sort of basically has sort of epileptic blackouts where she can't remember anything, and she sort of goes into a sort of a paralysis, a mental paralysis. And or walks off and can't be found, and the panic of the parents around this. So all of that is superlative. Now I think that, as I say, the reason I think some people didn't get on with it is the subplot where this professor buys a jacket through eBay, and when it arrives he notices there's a message written in Spanish pinned under the collar which basically says "Help us, please." And and he doesn't make anything of it, and he buys a shirt from the same place and there's another message pinned on it. So this is working away in the back of his head as his daughter's condition progressively waxes on, and he resolves that he's going to, if he can't save his daughter, he can at least try and get to the bottom of this and save whoever's put out this message. And it's a very, it's treated seriously, it's not done for laughs, but somehow it has a very different tone. It's a bit fantastical. It seems at odds with the heaviness of the daughter stuff, but in a way I think you need that light relief. As I say, it's a lighter relief because it's not funny, it's not played for laughs. So that worked for me, but equally I can see maybe for some people it didn't work, and I won't spoil the outcome of where all of that leads. This was a surprise. I don't know what I expected from this book, but it was surprisingly good in a totally different way, as I say, from the two previous Everetts I read last year. So 5 stars. I will just say I have no idea why it's called Telephone, and this is part of a rash of recent books of baffling titles or just really bad titles. So in my last wrap up, I read a book, You Too Can Have a Body Like Mine, by Alexandra Kleeman, which is a pretty good book. I understand why it's called that, but I think that's a terrible title. This book, I'm going to come on and talk about it. No One Will See Me Cry. Again, it makes sense from the book, but it's actually a terrible title, I feel. Anyway, it's just been a rash of either the author or the publishers not really, I think, devoting enough focus on titles. Titles are very important. Titles, I think, should give this a crystal of a clue as to what the book is about. That's just my personal belief. Okay, but don't be put off by the title, because this is another 5-star read, although it's probably 4.75 stars if such a thing existed, because the as much as I liked it, I did find the chronology and the structure slightly off-putting. But anyway, so this is Mexico at the turn of the 20th century, a time of turmoil and upheaval, of colonial wars with America, and then sort of dictatorships of the aristocracy, and people's uprisings and potential revolutions of the sort of bandit Robin Hood leaders like Pancho Villa and Zapata, a big anarchist movement in Mexico as well as socialist movement. So that's the background to this book. And there's 2 characters in it. One is from a well-to-do family who's rather frittered away his advantages in life because he, rather than train to be a doctor as his parents wanted him to, he wants to be a photographer and an artistic photographer. And he goes away to study in Rome, falls in love with a woman there, but at some point he resolves that no, if he's going to make his dream of becoming a photographer come true, he has to go back to Mexico. And he breaks up the relationship. And again, I won't give a spoiler, but the woman's response to that is really quite shocking and quite brilliantly done, I think. I don't think a male writer could have come up with that response. But he goes back to Mexico, but he can't get this woman out of her mind, partly because of her response has sort of got under his skin and she's still present effectively in his life. And he, his fortunes tumble. He gets a paid gig photographing criminals in prisons. He takes a side gig of photographing prostitutes in a bordello as his artistic arm of his work. And then he ends up getting a gig in photographing in an insane asylum. And all the while he's developed a serious morphine habit. So his fortunes are definitely on the slide. But one of the women he photographed in the bordello ends up in the insane asylum that he that he ends up photographing, and he remembers her, he recognises her, and he starts to sort of try to get to what her story is. There's a lot of stuff about, obviously prostitutes with syphilis, and one of the conditions that syphilis can lead to is, presenting all sorts of mental conditions, which is why women end up in insane asylums. That doesn't seem to be the case with her. Her background, as he gradually pieces it together, is that she's from a dirt poor country family. The father was an alcoholic, and once he drunk himself to death, that the mother sent her to her brother in Mexico, who's a well-to-do physician. There's basically a sort of Pygmalion element that this uncle is trying to sort of, give her breeding and manners and stuff. And she starts training as a sort of a doctor's auxiliary. But she gets increasingly swept up into the revolutionary politics in Mexico City and meets all these sort of artists and anarchists and free thinkers, and that's where her heart lies. But unfortunately it unravels all the Pygmalion stuff, so that she too falls on hard times and fortunes, ends up in the bordello. But successfully, she develops with another prostitute a sort of a cabaret review act, rather saucy, and they become the sort of talk of salon society. But her prostitute partner, who they're also lovers, sort of announces to her one day that she's found a very rich man, and he's going to sort of carry her off to the life that she's always aspired to, and breaks up the band effectively. And her fortunes slide even more, and that's why she ends up in the insane asylum. So that's the heart of the book. And one of the confusing things, as I say, is the chronology, and also you're not quite sure who the book's about. Is it about her, or is it about him? It sort of passes from one to the other, and when one fades out of the picture, I found that a bit baffling. But there's so much of interest here of the nature of art, the nature of medicine, and this is the time when Freud had just started writing, so there was this slow shift from a pursuit of medicine as illnesses because of sin, because of transgression, because of dark hearts, impure hearts. And there's a fascinating treatment of the woman's uncle is trying to sort of better Mexico's personal and moral hygiene in the masses, the great unwashed, literally, in order to elevate them and to sort of stave off things like crime and things like this. So there's that debate against medicine becoming more scientific, the ideas of Freud that it's not sin of the soul, there are mental conditions. All of that is brilliantly done. The politics of Mexico, again, absolutely fascinating. And if I was to sum up what the novel is about, I think it's this quote from towards the end: "Any allusions to morphine must be accompanied by words that are part spiritual, part modern. Phrases such as the loss of traditional values, for example, or this cold industrial madness, immediately assure him the compassion and complicity of his interlocutors. Disenchantment, disillusionment is in vogue these days. Touching upon it is an index of intelligence, the mark of a refined spirit. Without it, the others would not be able to justify progress, their own. Among certain successful men, losers are beautiful beings, not to mention essential in the complicated interactions of modern life." So I think this book is about the move towards modernity of Mexico, and as an independent, thriving democratic state, and how that got choked off, and the seeds of where Mexico has ended up today, this sort of huge narco corrupt tourist haven parts, huge discrepancies in wealth between the rich and the poor. This book covers all that. It covers the potential of Mexico to be this fantastic country, and where it all went wrong, and that's mirrored by the fate of these two characters. That this guy had high, lofty artistic ideals and fell well short of them, ends up taking degrading paid photography gigs, and a morphine addict. She had the chance to escape her upbringing, ends up in a whorehouse and then an insane asylum, unfortunately they're losers, as was here, and they were important to put in context the winners, who were the rich, the aristocracy, and all of that sort of stuff. And I think all of that is brilliantly done in this book. It's not just about these two characters, it's about the bigger picture. So 5 stars to that. I knock off a quarter star, to say, because at times I did get a bit confused about the chronology. And on to The Hill's Reply by Tarjei Vesaas, a Norwegian author. I saw Celia include this in her top 5 reads of last year. I'd read one Vesaas book before called The Ice Palace, which is a kind of spooky, maybe supernatural, environmental book where the mystery element and the thriller element came from the environment. This is totally different. This is, although it's still very much rooted in the environment, this is a dreamlike meditation, almost a fever dream, but I wouldn't say, I'd say an ice fever dream, not just because this is Norway, but the first 2 and 3 stories or chapters in this are absolutely stunning. They just take as their reference, a snowdrift that's, you can't see the road underneath, and the father and the son are trying to clear it with their horse, because the horse knows instinctively where the road is, so they follow behind the horse. Where the horse moves, they use their spades to get rid of the snow and stuff. And it's the relationship of the father and the boy. The father's very stern, the boy's very intimidated. So much is communicated without talking. But it's really about the environment. And then the next story is about a boy lying down in a marsh full of moss, because he's seen these cranes, not the building contrivance, the bird crane, come into land on this marsh, and they start doing a dance. And he's watching this, and then 2 of the cranes break off and sort of approach him, and it's just a brilliant meditation on the relationship of the human and the natural. And in both of those stories, there were also a pursuit of songs you can't hear, the songs of nature, the melodies of nature. There were sights of things that aren't really there, but they're not sort of crass mythological pixies or elves or leprechauns. This is much more embedded in the environment, like when the wind passes through a cave and sings its song because of the physics of air moving through small places. That is turned into something almost synesthetic in this book. There's a lot of the sense of the senses being engaged in different languages, so that what you see with your eyes you can also smell, or what you smell you can also hear, all that sort of stuff. It's just wonderfully done. This is an absolute joy to behold. I read it in a day. It's, as you can see, it's a small format book. It's just beautiful to read and bask in, and it does sort of prompt questions, metaphysical questions really. And this was Vesaas's last book, and it's like he just went for it. This is what I've learned. These are the questions that still lie unanswered for me at the end of my life. Beautiful, 5 stars. And on finally to Chroma by Derek Jarman, non-fiction. Jarman, first of all, I'll say that Bob the Bookerer turned me onto this. He talked about it recently, one of his wrap-ups. Jarman was a polymath, or he was a film director, a writer, a poet, and a visual artist, which is, I think, the body of his work I'm drawn to more than his films. I hadn't read any of his written stuff before. This is the first. And I will also say that the theme of this book, which is the nature of colour, which obviously he can approach as an artist, but also as a writer, and film with filters and all that sort of stuff. So he can come at it with great authority. But that subject of colour is an absolute obsession of mine. That my current novel, Stories We Tell Our Children, the first chapter in that is a mother and a young child playing a word game around colours. And the increasing despair of the mother as she realises that she's feeding her child a load of white lies, really, as to what colour is, and the fact that emotions are attached to colour. And sort of that's what this book is too. You know, Jarman, it's a meditation more than a set of essays. You know, Jarman's making associations of colour or to real objects such as flowers and stuff, but he's also the verbal associations we make with colour. If you think how many idioms revolve around colour, such as eminence grise or red letter day or how now brown cow, you know, all of that sort of stuff. So it operates on many levels. He also writes about Leonardo's theory of colour, Newton's discovery of the colour spectrum, Pliny the Elder's thoughts on colour, and it just all builds up into a wonderful meditation on the nature of colour generally, light, spectrum, but also individual colours and the emotional weight they have. One of the chapters is talking about how in the last year of his life he was losing his sight because of one of the side effects of contracting AIDS. Obviously, you know how tragic that is for a visual artist, but he's able to make something of it. Talk about blackness and blindness. It's just superlatively all round, and it's quite lyrical and poetic. As I say, it's not sort of dry essays, it's much more a personal meditation. And again, I highly recommend this. 5 stars. So what a great reading week I've had, where, you know, Telephone 5 stars, No One Will See Me Cry, despite its crappy title, 5 stars, 4.755 to me. The Hills Reply, 5 stars, and Derek Jarman's Chroma, 5 stars. So there you have it. Thanks very much, BookTube. Till next time.